South African internet user population passed the 20 million mark for the first time in 2016, and it should be reaching 21 million and is expected to get to at least 22.5 million in 2017. This is the main finding of the Internet Access in South Africa 2017 study released today by World Wide Worx with the support of Dark Fibre Africa. Joining me now is Arthur Goldstuck from World Wide Worx and Rashad Shah from Dark Fibre Africa. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good evening, Peter.
Okay, so this is quite interesting, and I suppose when we compare ourselves to other countries on the continent and face value, this is not a bad figure.
In fact, we're one of the most connected countries in terms of numbers on the continent, but we're still behind countries like Nigeria and Egypt, for example. When you compare us to other continents and developed markets, we're very far behind.
So now, you know, we are the number one economy on the country, depending on the oil price in Nigeria. How is it that we're behind them and Egypt?
With Nigeria, it's a matter of numbers. They have a population 3 times the size of ours. And in fact, when you look at the quality of connectivity and the intensity of usage of the internet in each of those countries, far more data is used in South Africa than in Nigeria per person. And that tells you something about cost, but also quality of infrastructure. So there's massive demand for connectivity, but not quite the supply that people need. And South Africa may look better than Nigeria from that point of view, but it certainly doesn't look good compared to more developed markets and industrial economies.
All right, so Rashad, what does this mean in terms of, are we rolling out this infrastructure? Is it because we're rolling out infrastructure that this shift has happened, or is it that we're just using more internet access on our mobile phones?
Well, of course, the drive of infrastructure rollout and the supply that's being created by infrastructure providers, in addition to what DFA is doing in South Africa, that to a large extent does fuel the demand for services. So there is an interesting relationship between those two, but as the report does find, the majority of users are still mobile. So mobile is still the primary connectivity means that most users are using.
So I read a report the other day, and it said that if you increase broadband connectivity by 10%, you get a jump of GDP by 1.3%. Why is that?
Well, that is an interesting stat, and it's actually very, very specific. It refers primarily to a country's population and internet penetration being very low for you to get that kind of GDP bump. So it doesn't hold true that for every 10% there's going to be that kind of a bump in
But
GDP.
clearly that there is a relationship between we roll this stuff out, you stick more fiber cables underground, and more people get connected, that there is a benefit to the economy.
Absolutely. And as we found in the results of this report, the economically active people do have a higher penetration than those that are, much lower earning. And in fact, on the no income side, the penetration level is severely low.
So this digital divide story continues, and before fiber, we had ADSL, people were left behind even then. Then the mobile phone came, we kind of sort of equalized the odds a little bit because we were all able to have a device in our hands. But now this connectivity story also widening this gap again.
Absolutely. There's an assumption that with smartphones suddenly migrating rapidly, or users migrating rapidly from feature phones to smartphones, that we are seeing a closing of the digital divide. But that's in fact not yet happening, because the rich or the haves have more, and the have-nots fall further behind. So what we're beginning to see, and what the report shows for the first time, is the emergence of a fiber to the home market. Now, those are the super connected. Those are not necessarily the super wealthy. They just happen to live in areas where there is fiber access and they can afford that access. And then at the other extreme are people who have hardly any access at all. And when you look at it from an educational point of view, the disparity is massive. From an income point of view, massive. And even from a regional point of view, it depends where you live, there's also a digital divide. So that divide is still there, and it's not going to go away until there is a concerted effort to connect the whole population, and also to make access affordable for everybody.
So what are we doing with these connections? What are most people doing using the internet for?
We asked that question through data collected by a company called Ask Africa, and we essentially asked people, what is your primary use of the internet? And communication was far and away the most significant usage. Only then came social networking. So the assumption is that everyone is on the internet for Facebook and Twitter, but it actually starts with just wanting basic communication. And I think that underlines an important point about access in this country. Communication is a vital need. It's a general human need. And that's why the cell phone industry exploded the way it did. And then behind those comes things like looking for information. And that again tells you that the internet is a fantastic resource for a high proportion of the population.
But interestingly, email not so much. So what are they communicating with? Is it these WhatsApps and things like that?
So email has definitely fallen behind with the Facebook and WhatsApp revolution. So people are using Facebook directly for communication, and Facebook Messenger specifically, but then WhatsApp is really the king of short communication and person-to-person communication.
So Rashad, one of the challenges that we have is the urban centres, urban areas, all electrified. So, you roll out the technology as much as you want. How do we reach rural areas? And some are still don't even have electricity yet. And that I guess must be a big challenge.
It is absolutely a big challenge. And like most fiber operators, the focus has always been in the main metro areas and the cities, because that's also where the economically active businesses are and people are who can afford this connectivity. The rural areas, to a large extent, have been left out from the connectivity boom, and as the research finds, the further out you go into rural areas, there's even less connectivity. So fiber is going to play an important role in connecting that, but primarily more from a backhaul perspective, or basically connections to a wireless endpoint of some kind. So wireless still needs some level of penetration to take place in the rural areas, and that will feed back into a fixed network, whether it's fiber or copper or something else.
So whose responsibility is it to get the connectivity out there? Is it government that builds roads, must build this internet highway, or is it enabling the private sector? How do we get someone in the northernmost part of the Northern Cape connected?
I think it's everybody's responsibility. It's not solely government's responsibility to provide connectivity. Of course, they play a critical role in unblocking the hurdles that allow private sector to continuously invest in connectivity and any form of infrastructure for that matter. But I do suppose it is everyone's responsibility to contribute towards connecting the unconnected, like in the banking sector, banking the unbanked. It's not just government's responsibility or the private sector, it's a joint responsibility.
I mean, if we were more connected, it would change the way we do things, isn't it? I mean, one of the things for me is I can't remember the last time I was inside a bank, and that is because we're connected. And I would imagine things like applying for passports and things like that would just change the game if we spent more money in connecting everybody.
There's no question about it. There has to be a mindset change, though. Today, for example, I saw a massive debate about people lining up for driver's licenses for renewals, and various offices had run out of forms, and they wouldn't allow people to download the forms and print them out. It had to be the official form. Now, that way of thinking belongs to a previous century. And it belongs to be a bureaucracy that has completely fallen behind the advances in digital technology. So government really does have to embrace, not just on a physical level, but also from a cultural and philosophical level, the idea of this digital revolution. And that in turn, I believe, will help to drive the rollout by government itself, or the support by government of rollout of greater access.
So hashtag data fees must fall. All of this is wonderful to have, But why are we still up there amongst the highest payers for things like data and ultimately staying connected?
We actually had this discussion a few weeks ago on this very show. The fact that it's not that our data is expensive overall, because the operators can argue that they've brought it down dramatically over time. It's that the poor who are buying data on an airtime basis, in other words, it goes off their airtime, they are paying the highest possible prices. And in fact, what they are paying is amongst the highest in the world, up to R2 per meg, compared to those who are able to afford big bundles paying a few cents a meg. And that's where the real divide lies.
All right, so what does this report tell us about trends? What are we going to see going forward as we get more and more connected, perhaps looking around the world and comparing? What are we seeing in the future?
I think what you're going to see a lot more of is what people use the internet for, and that is largely driven by how long they've had access to the internet, how comfortable they are with the technology to start doing online shopping, to start ordering services online, to start, as Arthur mentioned, being able to take care of themselves with basic municipal services or traffic services using the internet. And that's really going to that maturity of usage is actually going to further drive other digital transformation initiatives that people will go through.
So how when we compare ourselves to other parts of the world, so somebody's sitting in England and they want to send me something and they're on a certain speed, certain capability, I guess we have to keep up with the pace of change in the world for us to be able to communicate with the world. Otherwise, we've got the digital divide here at home amongst ourselves, but also we've got to be careful not to get left behind internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the speeds and feeds, as it's referred to, in terms of the speed of your connection, that really determines what you're going to do on the internet, whether it is a high definition video call or whether it is just receiving a very, very simple email, which, as we know, is trailing off a little. So where's the world moving? It's really moving towards much richer form of communication, which demands a very high speed type of connection. But we have to also bring everybody along on the unconnected side while still staying ahead on the high-speed connectivity. And we're seeing very high-speed connections now to homes as well as to businesses, and we're really up there in terms of those high-speed connections being able to deliver multiple gigs per second to your home or to the business.
All right, Arthur, final word. What use is this report? What will it do for us? How can we use it?
It gives very deep insights into the extent of infrastructure in this country, among other things, the little known fact that the mobile operators collectively spent more than 30 billion rand in their last financial years on infrastructure upgrades. It gives a very good sense of where that upgrade is happening, who is doing it, who are the biggest players in that, but then it also gives deep insights into user demographics. And then finally it looks at the future and what the impact is of the current scenario in the coming 5 years, for example, but also what needs to be done is a very big part of it. But it gives you a full understanding of the connectivity landscape and where we are connected and where we're not connected and where the gap lies and how to fill that gap.
And I suppose also, if you've got a strategy to make some money, you know how to deploy.
Exactly.
I have to ask you, dark fibre, I'm thinking dark web. There must be a story behind the name.
Yeah, so initially the company started providing dark fibre services, meaning unlit. So it's just an infrastructure service. Where we've graduated to today is providing fully lit fibre connectivity as well as an Internet of Things network.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating insights into this world that's growing on us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Okay, and that's where we're going to say goodbye. Thank you very much indeed for tuning in. We'll have more Prime Biz tomorrow at the same time, 6:30. We got news headlines at the top of the hour in literally a couple of minutes.